Welcome to Connecting to Admired Leadership, where twice a month we explore the behaviors and routines that make great leaders extraordinary. I'm Wes Bender, and I have the distinct pleasure of hosting some of our firm's partners, coaches, and clients to discuss leadership in ways you won't hear anywhere else. Let's dive into this episode and make people and situations better together. Today we're talking about change. A wise man once said, the only thing that does not change is the existence of change itself. The field note for today, so if you're not a subscriber to our field note, I'm going to drop that field note that is going to drive the discussion today with Diana. We're kicking off our new season of the show by revisiting one of our most popular sessions from last year. The title was The Type of Change People Most Support, and one of our most popular guests from last year, Diana Hong. If you have not, I certainly recommend going back into the archives of the show, which you can now do, and listening to that episode around change. So, question for you, Diana, to open us up. Who are you, and why is the topic of change so important? Who are you? Why do I love you so much, Diana? And why is the topic of change so unbelievably important?
Well, I feel like I'll give the professional answer, so somewhat from my bio, but then actually the reason why change specifically is so compelling to me does involve a little bit of a personal vulnerability moment. So I'll share a little bit of that as well. So my name is Diana Hong. I'm a partner at CRA Admired Leadership. I've been at the firm for about 13, 14 years and had a history of a career in finance before that for about 10 plus years or so. And over the course, as you might imagine, there's been an enormous amount of actual change that you participate in, even from something so tactical as a technology change or a process change or promotion, for an individual change, all of those things. And I think it's always been on my radar about how do we do this well and right. For when I look back in my career, even in the early days, being a young frontline supervisor, it was something where you're asked to do these things and asked to get other people on board and trying to unlock the level of how do you help people commit to it, right? And how do you help people actually adopt new behaviors, whether it's something writ large at a more cultural level, or whether it's very specific, like we need to use this Excel file differently this way, right? And what always intrigued me was that it didn't matter what the ask was, the actual process and orchestration of getting people to a new place was almost always an effort, right? It was almost always equally an effort. So that always started me down this path of there's got to be something else about how we spark people and engage people and involve them and bring them along with different changes. So that is the accurate but professional sort of story and an answer of why change and who I am. There's also a little bit too. So as I was, that's more personal, and I'll open up here because obviously Wes and you and I work together, and I think that those of us who are in our community are brought into admired leadership for professional and personal reasons. It resonates on both levels. But one thing I recall a very difficult time in my life that I was going through, where a very close friend passed away. And it wasn't completely unexpected, but it was certainly abrupt. And it was something where I was really struggling with coming to terms with it. And what's fascinating about all of the pablum or the advice about change is that it actually is basically coming from the grief research. So if you think about the stages of grief and where that comes from, some consultant about 20 years ago just took that and said, you know what, let's just talk about change as grief, right? And say everyone goes through denial, and then they go through acceptance, and they go through commitment, right? And I remember having that experience and being like, well, if this is where it comes from, and I don't think I'm fully through these cycles anyway, right? I don't think this works for me, right? Then what does that even say about change writ large, right? Where you're talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, or even a few dozen people on your team, and where you're talking about not just one person, going through their individual process to try to acquire or new behaviors or accept a new reality, but how that mixes in with everyone else they're working with, right? And so there was a moment in my life where that personal tragedy made me reflect and say, we need to do this better, because if the source material isn't even working for me about my personal grief issue, then I don't think this probably works for people in corporate America or corporate world, right? About what's getting them through or not through change. And so that's really what's drawn me back to this question again and again.
Oh, I love that. So it reminded me one of the things you said when we talked about change on the episode last year. One of the things you talked about is most people's frame when they go into change is this change is happening to me. I'm not really a part of this. This is happening to me in some major way. So with that said, I'd love to hear lots of people. We got people from New Zealand, California, all over the United States. Canada is on the call today too. So you got people from all over. I'd love to know on a scale of 1 to 10, what size of change do you feel like you're going through right now? What change is happening to you right now? So 10 is I've never experienced so much change in my entire life. One is I could not be even more, I could not be more stagnant, standard, normal as it goes. So I'd love to kind of get a gauge of that. Thank you guys so much for sharing. We already got a 10 right off the bat just a bit ago. So tell us, Diana, what is kind of the common norm? One common norm that you articulated, of course, that I just said last year was this is happening to me, the frame of reference. Is there another common norm as it relates to this topic of change that is prevalent out there? That when we think about change, this is a common norm that's out there.
Yeah, and I think actually it overlaps a lot. So part of the reason, it's not all of the reason, part of the reason you often feel like a change is being done to you is because it's actually being sold to you, right?
Mm.
And it's very hard to not feel like you are somehow an unwilling participant of a direct marketing or spam call if someone comes up to you your door and says, guess what? This new thing, it's going to be great. Now you got to deal with it, right? And you're saying, okay, I wasn't part of the conversation. I wasn't included in any of the decision making of this. And now you're asking me to participate and you're selling me the story of, oh, it's going to be amazing. Look at this future. We're all going to thrive, et cetera. But you're the one, I'm the one bearing the burden of changing what I do, cleaning up any sort of transition issues, going back and making sure everyone I work with knows what's happening before versus what's happening now. Like I'm the one in the crossfire dealing with that, right? And yet
Mhm.
here, this grand vision, the story of change is being sold to me as if somehow I can just purchase a product and just simply go on my merry way, right? So I think that's really where we see as unfortunately a default norm is that people really take this branding marketing approach or companies will take a branding marketing approach to change. I mean, those of you who are on the chat, feel free to either raise your hand or chime in about the last time there was probably a major change initiative. You got a tchotchke, right? You got a thing, a stress ball, or a little paperweight,
Ev-
or
Everyone's looking at it on their desk right
right?
now. They
Right. And
see
a
it on
pen with
their
the logo of the name of the change, right? Because as if all you needed was a pen with a name on it, and then you were going to be happy.
Catherine,
So,
Catherine just said she got a laptop sticker.
right,
Congratulations.
exactly. Clearly, that was all you were missing in this life was the laptop sticker. And now oh, I'm ready for all of this. Right.
That's
So,
awesome.
I mean, I'm joking and smiling about this. And I don't want to undermine the real desire to create awareness about change,
Mhm.
right? Because
Mhm.
obviously what's worse than having change being done to you is having it being done to you and then finding out after the fact, right? Like, but
Yeah.
absolutely, there's a good intent about we need to raise awareness. We need to get people to know something's happening, what it's called, when it's happening, all of those things, right? But the real knowing isn't about a logo or a motto or a slogan or a project name. The real knowing is being able to get your hands in it and say, okay, when you say this, will there be multiple times where I get to interact and almost plan out what might change on my side too? So maybe it's process mapping, maybe it's testing out a system, maybe it's a quick sort of involvement in a focus group so you can ask questions and get some responses. Maybe it's even the commitment to have consistent periodic updates where there's more and more granular information being shared, but at regular times throughout the entire process so that you start getting more comfortable with, oh, okay, so that's what they meant when they said we're going in this direction versus that direction. So there's different ways that this can show up. It doesn't just have to be about, the slogan and the awareness campaign. The real awareness comes with digging your hands in, and that's where some of that idea of involvement and engagement and having your tangibility of it comes in.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. So I love Christy Hodge said, I have a box filled with stress balls. I wonder if did the organization give you those stress balls as they were moving in to
Maybe
the
they gave her the stress and then also the stress balls, right? Sort of the problem and the
Oh,
solution.
that's fantastic.
Oh, that's
This
funny.
this is this is the first webinar of 20 some that we're having throughout the year. We're already having a great time. So this is fantastic. So Diana, tell us how have you seen this play out in more specific case studies or impact stories with the clients that we work with? So kind of bring us into a real practical reality of what this really looks and feels like.
Yeah. And I think so. We talked about a little bit of the approach where it's really about how tangible can you get? How can you make it meaningful and substantive with people? And then obviously, when you're trying to orchestrate that on a scale of maybe thousands or tens of thousands of people who are involved, that can get very complicated, right? And so some clear principles that we always try to do is, how can you involve people in increments or in sort of phases, right? So if you step back and you say, here's this group, and they're going to be one of the first people who have to go through this change. Let's figure out to work with them and partner with them. Can we demo things? Can we beta test things? Can they be part of our task force, right? Whatever you want to call it, where we say, look, you guys are the first ones going through this. We're trying to do a countdown to this. Can you start mapping out, what needs to change, what concerns you might have, et cetera, and really involving them even in the planning and piloting of the process, right? So that then it makes it better for them because they get to actually help shape what's happening. And then B, it makes it better for everyone else after them too, because ideally there's stuff from that you can then take to the next group and the next group and the next group. And what you'll typically find is that the most credible people in a change are usually not the senior most leaders, far off from the person who needs to do a change. It's other peer-like people who have gone through it recently who say, yeah, you know what? I thought it was going to be a big headache, but actually it was only one day's worth of work. And then bada bing, bada boom, we were back on in business. Or, say like, actually, we did have a few stumbles, but here's actually what we ended up doing differently. And I think the way you have your process now, you'll be able to address that ahead of time. That's going to be a lot more credible than just only having senior leadership say, here's what we're doing and it's going to be amazing. And the stock market loves it and our board loves it, our investors love it, and you should too, right? I think you
Yeah.
need that sense of peer-to-peer input.
I think it's interesting what you said. We always talk about how you said, our board loves it, the stock market loves it. I'm looking through all the people we've got on the call today, especially live. And what's fascinating is these same principles cross over into every industry. That's the beauty of the work that we do in a real behavioral approach to this work is it crosses every industry, every psychographic, every demographic across the board. So if you heard Diana say you're bored and in the stock market, some of you may also put that into say my volunteers. If many of you are running nonprofits out there, the volunteer board of directors that I work with on an everyday basis, my staff. I know we've got a principal, a head of school that's on today too. My students, my families, all those on the receiving end of your leadership. That's where this plays out in a major way. So great stuff. All right, so I want to get into some of the pre-questions that came up for some folks. The first one was why there is resistance to change, even if the outlook looks better. And I see this with a lot of folks. The outlook is clear. I can clearly articulate the vision for this. Everybody's on the same page. In fact, there's people sometimes who will agree. Yes, I believe this change will be better, yet there's still resistance at the end of the day. So, and when we were in Chicago live talking about this with a group last year, you had a great exercise that you used. I don't know if you remember that or not, but my hope is you might play that
Yeah.
into your comments a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. So I think well I'll talk about the exercise as a way of illustrating why people resist even when logically it seems like it makes sense. And so I do this a lot with larger groups or even mid-sized groups. I'll look around and I'll try to see if someone is wearing a watch or a ring, right? And most times when people have, exactly, if people have one or the other or both, most times you have a preferred place that you wear it, a preferred finger, a preferred wrist, etc. And in some cases, I'll ask, how long have you been wearing that? You might get a response about, yeah, I've been wearing a watch for the last 10 years, or this is my wedding ring. I've been married for 20 years. And so it's been there for 20 years, all of these things, right? And then I'll just say, all right, play along with me here. All right, wear it on the other hand. And they'll go, wait, what? Why? Okay, I have, and then I'll tell them, actually, because you can find a study for anything, by the way. I was like, actually, there's a study that shows if you wear your watch on your right hand, it could improve your heart health. No one's really sure why, but it's correlated, right? I'll start listing out little facts to build the case and sell the story, right? About why they should wear their watch or their ring on their other hand. And you can start seeing, generally from people's faces, I'm not really happy about this. But every once in a while, you get someone who's willing to play and say, fine, for, just for the sake of experimentation, let's do this, right? And even if someone does play along and they do that, then I'll start asking them, so how do you feel? And the immediate knee-jerk response is like, I don't like it. Well, why don't you like it? Because literally your body has grown used to having it on the other hand. And some
Yeah.
people will talk about writing is just feels awkward, or it literally feels tighter, it just feels different, it's getting in the way, discomfort, all those things, right? So I use that example to illustrate that it is often not the macro or the logical issue that is getting in the way. It is the micro discomforts, right? That
Mhm.
stop people and go, yeah, I mean, you say this is a good idea. And I might even acknowledge that it's a good idea, but to do it right now, really? Like, do you know how busy I am? Do you know that this is our month end cycle season? Do you know that right now we just acquired another, organization and we're trying to blend everything? There's so many reasons why right now here it's a difficult, uncomfortable issue, right? To make any changes. And so that's where people start resisting.
Mhm.
Again, let's go back to the comment earlier about the biggest mistake that a lot of organizations make is they try to sell the change. And when you're trying to sell the change, what do you double down on? You double down on the rationale and the logic and the case for change and blah, blah, blah. But if the real issue is that micro level, that day-to-day discomfort, that, this is a lot of effort right now, not the end reason, not the vision, not the strategy that you're trying to steer me to, then all of that doubling down doesn't really actually address the question that people have, does it? So,
Mm.
that's really where I think the fundamental issue comes in.
So, is part of overcoming resistance to change simply about recognizing, of course, making people really feel the uncomfortable feeling right up front so they know this is going to be uncomfortable? So, when that uncomfortable feeling comes, maybe they're a little more ready for it in some way. And doing that through simple exercises like changing your watch. I dropped my ring on my other finger. It did not fit as well, number one. That was one thing. But I dropped it on the other finger and it's so unbelievably awkward feeling.
Right. Exactly. Again, in that exercise, I've had people under the table switch back quietly in hopes that I won't notice, those kinds of things. So
That's
it is
hilarious.
common. So yeah, I think there's two things to this. One is there's a myth that you can avoid all discomfort, that if somehow you get people excited enough and cheerleading enough, that somehow magically all issues will go away, right? And let's just be rational human beings and say that's not going to happen. In fact, a lot of times I think of it as a spectrum, and the two extremes you never want to be at. There's probably some flex in the middle about what's right for you, what's right for your team, what's right for your organization. And one extreme tends to be, let's term it quick and bloody, right? It's a lot of change. It's probably very painful to a lot of people, but it's over fast, right? And
Yeah.
there is a certain element to, well, now we get to all move on, right?
Yep.
And on the other extreme, there's long, protracted, and torturous, right? Which is, it's not that the total amount of discomfort goes away. It's just that every day it's, a little bit at a time and slowly and one more person and then a little bit more and da 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 da, right? And again, sometimes that works for some organizations because that general long sort of evolution allows people to finally come on board. I in my experience, find that the right feeling answer, the right effective answer for most teams is actually probably somewhere in the middle, right? You
Yeah.
just need to figure out what the balance is. It's not that you can avoid all discomfort or all pain or all issues or all extra effort. The question is, how much do you want to reduce on the amount of time and quickness, and then potentially increase the punch of a lot of change going through at one time, versus how much you want to stretch it out, and then hopefully make it a little bit more incremental, but to what end? To,
Yeah.
for how long? And then
Yeah.
that is really the art versus the science.
Yep. All right, so I'm going to frame three questions all together, but you feel free to answer any of them you want, and I'm going to position basically levels of the organization. So I'm the leader and I'm driving the change. I'm the person under the leader,
Mhm.
and I want to drive the change, perhaps. Or I'm the person who's being told about the change from the top, and I'm supposed to lead all the people underneath me through that change too. So the question is, when you're the leader, how long does it take to feel like the change is taking root?
Mhm.
That's the question that was here. So let's start there at the very top.
Yeah. At the very top, the single biggest reinforcement that I give is you need to be tired of repeating yourself, because if you're the leader, you're probably more involved in the upfront decision makings for months at a time, right? Maybe you talked about it with your executive team, maybe you sat down and really, started exploring different options. You were probably one of the first to even think about whatever this change is, right? And then now you've greenlit it, and it's going to go through the rest of the organization. It's new to them. So if I've had all the luxury of me, at least for a couple weeks, a couple days, a couple months, getting used to it, I need to be aware that other people need probably just as much time to get used to the idea, understand what it's about, get on board, etc. So for a leader at the top, you're going to feel like you have repeated yourself 7, 8, 9, 10 times, right? Because it's really still the first, second, third time for everyone else. And that's completely okay. So that's at the top. The next layer down, I would say, then the mission becomes, how do you translate this? How do you make it into real priorities? And you probably aren't as close enough to get into the weeds, with every single person. So it's really about, okay, we've got this massive change. Of this massive change coming, here are 1, 2, 3 priorities for our piece of the organization. And then how are we going to help work with other people to make it easy? What's the degree that I need to go back at the next layer down to my people and update them, understand how they're feeling, ask them what's going right, what's going wrong at the biggest sorts of levels, right? So it's about creating that cadence for change, right? Cadence for updates, cadence for communication, all of those pieces. And
Yeah.
then the mid level is really where the rubber meets the road, so to
Yeah.
speak. And that's really where we see the biggest fall off, because
Mhm.
quite frankly, the mid level is where you're under pressure to deliver. And a lot of times it is the regular things as usual, right? And then you're also being told all of these other things are changing. So you're kind of like, if I tell people too soon, is that going to distract them? Right. So there may be some intentional and well-intentioned filtering there at your level. But then what happens is that, time passes and then people still don't get the information that they need below you. So that idea of sometimes it's called the frozen middle, that's typically where it happens. So how do you
Huh.
unfreeze? I think a lot of that is about making sure that you play the role of translation, that, you're constantly sort of looking at this and going, okay, so I've heard about the big vision. I've heard about our divisional department priorities. All right, this is what it means tactically for my team. Let's have a conversation, answer their questions, et cetera. And then also what we find is that if you as someone in the middle have help and a lot of connection points with people across, that's really where the clever ideas come is not from top down. It's actually from a mid-level manager connecting with another mid-level manager and being, hey, how are you guys dealing with this one? Or did your
Yep.
people ask you this? Because they're asking me this too. And being able to across share is really mission critical as well.
That's fantastic. All right, so I'm going to tee you up for closing remarks. The time always goes by way too fast with you, Diana, but I'm going to tee you up for closing remarks. Drop some things in the chat box for folks as kind of follow up. But I'd love for you to speak kind of your closing remarks now. If you have better closing remarks than this, please feel free to pivot. There's a million different graphs out there that graph change as a curve. Yet you introduced, I remember in Chicago last year, you introduced this concept that change is not actually a curve as best. And so if you could kind of frame that at the end, how should we go into change? I think it'd be good for everybody. While you collect those thoughts, for joining us live today. If we didn't get to your question, because there were, I think, 32 questions that came in ahead of time for this particular webinar. We actually are allowing folks who join us live to book a quick 10 minutes with one of our coaches this year. So you can follow that link and do that, and we'll pair you up and you can chat with folks in regards to that. Our next webinar is actually Tuesday. So Tuesday is going to be Ben Stringfellow, and he's going to be talking about character is revealed in success, not just failure. So you can see that as well as many other things coming up in that events link that I just dropped in there as well. So Diana, send us home in the last 2 minutes. How should we go about change? Is it a curve?
Answer is no. Change is a wave. It's not a curve. And what we mean by that is that it'll feel like you go through ups and downs. But if you believe that somehow it's only going to be one up and down and then full stop, you're done, no change ever again, you never have to revisit anything, etc. I think the way I'm explaining it already sort of clearly indicates to you and probably resonates with you as well that change is never once and done, right? We don't
Yeah.
live in an environment where you can say, oh, great, now we'll never have to do anything else again. So if you just anticipate that whether it's this change that has consequences or you continue to evolve and learn and say, oh, we actually need to pivot again this way, maybe it's a specific change that continues to sort of have ripple effects, or it's other changes, right? All of us work in places, whether it's, again, to your point earlier, in nonprofit, to education, to industry, to anywhere. Every single one of these is rapidly changing, whether it's technology or communication or demographics or people, all of these things are changing. So if we assume that our changes are actually going to continue on, then the question becomes, how do you get good at riding that wave, right? So it's actually not just about getting through this one specific change, but how do you build in yourself and your team the ability to get really good at sharing information, get really good at getting involved, and then and trying to make things better along the way. Get really good at identifying incremental goals and milestones so that people feel like they're making progress, and you can look back and say, okay, this is how far we've come, and this is what we've left to do. So all these things are a skill set, basically. And I also think the other thing that I've started to frame out with our clients is, most people talk about change like a noun, like this is the change. The problem with that is that it's an event and then it's over. But change is actually also a verb. So let's just get really good at changing.
Yeah.
So that's the last piece I'll leave you with.
That's fantastic. It's the most powerful thing I've ever heard you say about change for me personally, whether we're working to become a better in our personal leadership of self as we navigate into change, or we are leading others. This whole concept that it's an opportunity to learn how to adapt to change because it never stops. It's the goal is should not necessarily be everyone accepts the change and we've been successful. The goal should be an opportunity to learn to adapt to change. And that creates a much stronger team long term. Just phenomenal, phenomenal stuff. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us, those who were live today. For those of you who are listening to the recording over YouTube or one of the many podcast channels that's out there today, thank you so much. Diana, you are wonderful. Appreciate you taking the time to provide insights around change. Hope everyone has a fantastic rest of the day and a fabulous weekend. Cheers, everybody.